Hello. Welcome to this episode of the Catechetical Corner, handing on and defending the faith. In the previous episode, attendees of a workshop put on by the Office of Catechetics called Answering Atheism, the philosophical principles of catechesis, were exposed to the cosmological argument for the existence of God. This explanation clearly shows that faith and reason are not at odds with one another, despite skeptics' assertions that they are. In this episode, we'll take a look at the almost impossible statistical probability of fine-tuning existing within our universe by chance alone, and why its presence completely refutes the assertion of Richard Dawkins that the process of evolution has disproven the existence of God. Does a materialist worldview really offer freedom from the oppressive and controlling dogma of a theistic one? Or is it just asserting that to hide the fact that the very thing it claims to eliminate, it actually creates in the lives of those who embrace it? Let's take a look at all the evidence and find out.
Anybody here play poker before? Okay. So if you play a game of poker, right, with a standard 52 deck of cards, right, and you pass it out, what's the highest hand that somebody can deal you that if you have it, no matter what everybody else has, you win?
A royal flush.
A royal flush. Okay. Do you know what the statistical probability is? In a random 52 card deck of cards, in a random game of poker, that you would be dealt that specific hand? Once again, these are not my numbers. 1 out of every 650,000 what? Deals. Wow, so if you get a royal flush, it's really rare, right? Okay, so let me ask you a question. If I was playing you in poker, the two of us, right? And we played 5 hands in a row, and I won all 5 hands in a row with a royal flush. What would you automatically think? I cheated, right? Good. I had designed the deck with my intellect before we played for this specific outcome.
You set up the cards.
I set up the cards. My intellect gave me the ability to do it, to formulate the design, and my will gave me the power to do it and put it into motion, right? Do you know what the statistical probability of constants is? It's more likely that you and I would sit down and play a game of poker and I would win 5 hands in a row with a royal what? Flush. Then the probability of constants remaining exactly the same from 13.7 billion years ago up until this moment in time for life to evolve to the point that it has. So it'd be pretty irrational, right, of you, don't you think, to leave it to pure chance that I won 5 hands in a row like that? But somebody who's an atheist will leave something that's less likely in probability than that to chance. They say we're irrational for believing in God. I think that's pretty what? Irrational.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, Or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would, again, be life-prohibiting. Or, another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
So if the universe can't explain itself, it can only explain what it is but not why it is, and it has a cause outside of itself, and that cause is immaterial, eternal, immutable, omnipotent, and omniscient, because it has a super intellect and a will to bring things into existence and hold them in existence. Who is that? It's God. Now, if you haven't had a logic class, I'm going to give you a syllogism, okay? So just a fancy term, it's like you're going to make a statement that has like a logical conclusion to it. Has a major premise, a minor premise, and a concluding thought. So the first statement is the major premise. The process of evolution is dependent on fine-tuning in the universe. That's what the constants remaining exactly the same for allowing life to exist, that's fine-tuning. So evolution, which can explain what it is but not why it is, its cause is something outside of itself. Its cause is fine-tuning. Quantum physics has proven there is fine-tuning in the universe. Science has proven there's fine-tuning in the universe. Therefore, the process of evolution was only possible because of fine-tuning in the universe. And since evolution can only tell us what it is but not why it happened, it certainly can't be an adequate explanation for why you and I, which are quote-unquote part of that process, are here. Therefore, Richard Dawkins is wrong. And his argument is intellectually insufficient. And you can be an intellectually satisfied theist with a cosmological argument. Now, I'm going to quote Edward Fazer. He's a leading Thomist today. Dawkins' problem is that he doesn't know the difference between probabilistic empirical theorizing and strict metaphysical demonstration, and thus misreads an attempt at the latter as if it were the former. That is not to say that Aquinas might not be mistaken at some point in his argument, though obviously I don't think he is. But if you're going to show that he is, you first need to understand what kind of argument he's giving, and thus what kind of mistake he'd be making if he's made one at all. In other words, you can't refute something you don't what? Understand. He's wrong. Now, I get all the time from my kids, what does the Catholic Church teach about evolution? Well, as a Catholic, you can believe in evolution as an evolving process of life. Life is always evolving. What we must reject, and it's evolving based on a guided process by an infinite intellect and a will. But we must reject is Darwinian evolution, which says that by random chance and adaptation to the environment, you and I are nothing more than clever apes.
Some people say, well, what about evolution? Evolution shows God doesn't exist. Life just evolved. But how does life evolving over billions of years show there is no God? Isn't it possible God could have created the universe and allowed life to evolve up to this point? In fact, the Catholic Church doesn't take a position on whether life evolved or not. All the Church says in the First Vatican Council is that God created all of the universe from nothing by his own will. The Church is silent on how he did it or how long he took. All the Church has said is that man's soul, God created that in a special moment because the soul isn't made of matter, so it can't evolve. But our bodies could have, so there's no contradiction in believing in evolution and God. Now, some atheists might say, yeah, but why would God waste billions of years on evolution? I'd say, God is eternal. He literally has all the time in the world, like literally does. So a few billion years to God, that's chump change for him. If he wants to create the world that way, I don't see a problem with that. So that's the second reason to be an atheist I don't find compelling.
Also, we have a written document in the magisterial documents written by a pope that affirms that. Most people are not aware of this, but it's really important. Humani Generis is written by Pope Pius XII in the 1950s, and it condemns modernism, which is the idea that you can take everything supernatural out of our faith, like Jesus just persuaded people to share at the feeding of the 5,000. He didn't supernaturally multiply loaves of bread and fish. That's not making our faith better. That's creating a completely different faith than the one that's been revealed to us by God. So Pope Pius XII, he says, the teaching authority of the Church does not forbid the research and discussion of science that takes place with regard to the doctrine of evolution, and as far as it is to inquire into the origin of the human body as coming from pre-existing and living matter. In other words, our bodies could have evolved from pre-existing matter. What we can't believe is that it was some random chance that we became rational. No, God, through his ruah, his breath, the breath of life, he breathed the breath within us and gave us an intellect and a will to be able to choose to love the person next to us, even to our own detriment, because we're designed to be in communion with other people. And when God decided to do that in his infinite being, he could choose to do it whenever he wanted to, because he stands outside of time and what? And space. There's no contradiction between being a Catholic and holding some view of evolution, as long as it's not Darwinian what? Evolution. And you can also hold to the 6 days of literal interpretation of Scripture, although I don't know how you sell that to a non-believer when they get to day 4 and they're talking about 4 days, and it's not till day 4 that God creates the sun and the moon. And you and I dictate days by the 24-hour period that the earth revolves around the what? The sun on its axis. But you can reason with somebody, and a biblical literalist, a Protestant, Bible alone, they can't do that. We can. Because they literally hold to the fact, no matter what evidence has been presented, faith alone comes from Scripture alone. It's the only source of divine revelation. And God created the world in 7 flat what? Days. As a Catholic, you don't have that problem. Faith and reason do not contradict. They what? They complement. We need to show kids that. And one of the great things about our faith is that we do have an answer, an adequate answer for what it means to be human. Because Jesus Christ is the perfect human being. He came to redeem us in our humanity. Unlike what our Protestant brethren theologically teach, we are not totally depraved. You are deprived of grace. And God came to redeem you so that you could have a relationship with Him and to sanctify you, to restore the very life of God within you that was lost. So your body is not bad. It's inherently good. And your soul is there to receive that grace in that composite union. And that kind of tells us, right, when Jesus comes in the incarnation, what it really means to be human. I've never met a single kid that I've taught that didn't have those questions. I've asked those questions myself, especially when suffering enters your life. And everybody in here has had some shape or form of suffering in their life. And you always ask those big questions, huh? Why? And you really start to ask deeper questions like, well, who am I, really? Where do I come from? What is the meaning of this life? And where am I going? I think today's young people, and even ourselves, this is the biggest lie in the world is that we're connected to people on these things. We are more disconnected to people on these things than we've ever been connected to anybody. You connect with people in a one-on-one relationship that's an encounter with a person. That's a lie. And we've all kind of bought into it at some point. And it's a very good distraction when we want to sit in silence. Because when you sit in silence, you have to think about these kind of things. You have to think about yourself. You have to deal with yourself. People don't like to do that. But it's where we discover God and where we discover the deeper meaning about who we are. So philosophy, and the reason I love philosophy so much, is that not only the existence of God is not a scientific, you don't prove it with science, you prove it through philosophy. You can't come to determine your purpose or meaning through science. Right? You can't tell why you're beautiful or not beautiful, why you should or shouldn't do something, or why you're here or not here through science. People try to sell that to you. In the secular world, kids buy into it hook, line, and sinker, but it's not true. Philosophy gives us that. There's a great excerpt, and if you would go online and look at the Franciscan model and did this one, it's all about an adequate anthropology. It's just a big word that means, what does it mean to be a human being? We have the best answer for that. Okay? John Paul II, Pope St. John Paul II, he wrote a magisterial document. It's called Fides et Ratio. It just means faith and reason. And I'm quoting it here. Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth, and God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth. Jesus said, I'm the way, I'm the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In a word, to know God Himself. So that by knowing and loving God, men and women may also come to the fullness of truth about who they are, since we're made in His image and His what? And His likeness. Okay? We have a destiny. Our human nature, our soul, that body-soul composite, it has a final purpose. Modern philosophy has eliminated that. A materialistic worldview, if a philosopher is completely honest, will take them to a point where they will say life is ultimately meaningless. And I don't know a single person, regardless of their belief system, that acts like their life means absolutely what? Nothing. Call them on that. Okay, what is our worldview? I gave you these in this specific fundamental thing here. Okay, the fundamental reality is the groundedness of existence itself. In other words, it's the source of all existence. What did we already establish that is, or who that is? Whose essence is existence itself? God. So God is the fundamental reality. He's the eternal God of love, the necessary, uncaused, omnipotent, omniscient, rational being who through an act of His creative will and infinite power brings all dependent or contingent beings from non-existence into existence. These beings are created, specifically humans, in His image and likeness. At a specific moment in human history, He wasn't created, He entered into time and space. He's begotten with the Father. Jesus Christ was there with the Father from the beginning. He has no beginning, he has no end. He entered into time and space and took on a human nature and hypostatically united it to his divine nature in the incarnation to redeem and sanctify humans, to participate in the divine life of God. You and I have the gift of reason, which allows us to comprehend a moral law and the eternal lawgiver. God can't reveal something to be immoral in the past, and all of a sudden we, who are finite, and he has an infinite mind, come to the conclusion that he was wrong and that it's moral. Otherwise, it contradicts itself, and he ceases to be who? God. Morality then is a manual for the pursuit of the good. And what's the ultimate good? God himself. In virtue. And expresses itself in a free will choice to return to God the love that he has first given to us. Our faith is not about following rules. It's about reciprocating love. And we've been elevated by the participation in his divine life to be able to do that. That means if we're made in the image and likeness of God, and God is the ultimate meaning, you and I in our human dignity and integrity, we have what? Meaning. Your life has purpose. You have meaning. You are infinitely important and infinitely special. You will never be recreated again. And you have a destiny. That destiny is to be with God, to love God, serve God, and be with God, and know God for all eternity. If you open up the Catechism of the Catholic Church and read the prologue in paragraph 1, that's exactly what it says. Okay? These are the four horsemen of the new atheism. And when your young people are spending a lot of time online, you go watch these guys' YouTube videos and see how many views they have. And if you look at the demographics that are viewing them, it's probably the young people, a lot of them that are like within your classes. And this is their view of the world. The fundamental reality is not God. It's simply you, your matter in your body. You are your body, that's it. Its physical properties and the laws of physics which govern it. Somehow, some dramatic primordial event happened. Something evolved from nothing, all by itself, even though they won't accept that explanation for anything else in the material world, of a chain of physical events which are still playing out in the universe. Human beings, like all entities of every order of being, are the random temporary byproduct of Darwinian evolution. Humans are neither free, in other words, you have no free will. You might think it's free will, but it's just a source of consciousness you're producing from protons and neutrons firing off in your brain and producing your version of reality, and I'm producing my version of reality. There's no actual reality. That's Daniel Dennett. You're not rational. You have no purpose, and you have no value. Morality in absolute sense cannot exist, nor can there be any coherent justification for natural law. The thing Paul writes about that's written on the heart of every human person, that you don't need the Ten Commandments to know. You don't need the Ten Commandments to tell you shouldn't commit adultery. You don't need the Ten Commandments to tell you it's not a good idea to lie. You don't need the Ten Commandments to tell you it's not a good idea to covet your neighbor or your neighbor's wife, because if you do that, you know there's going to be chaos where there should be order. So that's inherently designed in each one of us. We can come to know God exists through reason alone. And when we come to know God exists through reason alone, because he's created a desire within us to know him, he has to reach down to us and reveal things to us about himself in a way we can understand. And that's what the incarnation is about. They deny all of that. And if they want to take it to the full conclusion, they have to mean that morality doesn't apply to you or me any more than it does a tomato or a cat. Right and wrong evolved. That's their stance. Through three things, and you'll hear this. It evolved through the scientific process of evolution. It evolved through individual practices. And it evolved through cultural influence. This is a term we hear a lot called moral relativism. What is moral relativism? I'll give you a very quick example of what moral relativism is. You ever heard somebody talk to you that disagrees with you and says, well, that's your truth and it's true for you, and I have my truth, so my truth is true for me, and your truth is true for you? This is classic moral relativism. Now, moral relativism is a self-defeating proposition. See, I gave you that definition. It also violates the philosophical principle of the law of non-contradiction. If somebody says something that contradicts itself, it can't be what? True. It can't be true. Okay, so if you talk to somebody who's a moral relativist, and they make that comment, right? A proposition that refutes, defeats, or disproves itself in the very act of being held. In layman's terms, you're arguing about the necessity of a branch that you're sawing off while you're sitting on it. Let me give you an example of what I mean. The statement I just made. What's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. So wait a minute, you're a moral relativist, right, philosophically? Absolutely. You don't believe in absolutes? Absolutely not. You just made an absolute statement. You contradicted yourself. Now, if the source of the universe comes not from within it, but something outside of it, I want to show you how the source of morality doesn't come from within evolution, from within a person, or from within society. It doesn't come from within those three things. It comes from something what? Outside of them. It was there before any of that got here, and it'll be here after all those things are what? Are gone. This is very important for young people to understand. Because if God is the infinite goodness, and we're going to determine whether or not something is right or what, we have to have a measuring stick, and the measuring stick is the ultimate good, and that is God. So God did not reveal that something is an abomination now, and all of a sudden, because popular opinion says it's not, all of a sudden it didn't become an abomination.
Is it true that there are no absolutes in the world, especially absolute truth? Obviously, this absolute assertion would disprove any thought process that denies the reality of anything absolute. Therefore, it is a self-contradictory statement and is ultimately false. There are absolute truths in the world that we live in our very human nature. Daily life decisions and experiences testify in themselves to that ultimate truth, which isn't something, but rather someone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Catechetical Corner, handing on and defending the Catholic faith. As any good apologist would say, always be ready to give an explanation to those who ask you for the reason for the hope that is within you, and do it with gentleness and reverence, so that those who malign you for being in union with God will be put to shame. Join us next time as we examine the claims that morality can be derived from the process of Darwinian evolution, from personal experience or inner understanding of an individual, or societal norms that have evolved throughout changes in culture and human history. If these things are not a satisfactory explanation for a moral law from within themselves, it must mean that a moral law exists outside and independent of each one of them. God love you, and we'll see you next time.